another episode of All Access Med School Admissions. I'm your host, Christian Essman, and I'm coming to you from Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine in Cleveland, Ohio. Hello again, everybody. We've got a great episode for you today. I'm really excited. We're going up to the northeast of the United States to Boston, Massachusetts to talk about Tufts University School of Medicine. Today I'm going to be talking with Dr. David Neumeyer. He's the Dean of Admissions there at Tufts, and he is what you might call the quintessential clinician educator. But before I tell you more about Dr. Neumeyer, let me give you a little background on Tufts University's School of Medicine. They're located near Chinatown in Boston, Massachusetts, kind of wedged between the Back Bay and Four Point areas of Boston, near downtown, if you're kind of familiar with that area. So it's very much an urban setting. Incidentally, the medical school is located right across the street from the Tufts Medical Center. The school's been in existence since 1893, and they are driven to educate a diverse body of students and advance medical knowledge in a dynamic and collaborative environment. Tufts seeks to foster the development of dedicated clinicians, scientists, public health professionals, and educators who have a sustained positive impact on the health of individuals, communities, and the world. Tufts is a private institution and accepts applicants from Canada, international students, and applicants who have the DACA status. Additionally, there's no state residency requirement. In 2018, the medical school received 12,106 applications, and they interviewed 804 for a class size of 200. 53% of those entering in 2018 were comprised of women, and 17% self-described as underrepresented in medicine. Here's some more data for you. Based on AMCAS matriculant data for 2018, 76% of incoming students in 2018 to Tufts had community service or volunteer experiences. 82% had some form of physician shadowing or clinical observation experiences. 85% had medical or clinical community service or volunteering experiences. 51% had some type of paid medical or clinical employment. And 92% had research or lab experience. Here's some stats for you, some metrics. The median GPA for students accepted to Tufts in 2018, so this is accepted, was 3.73 with a range of 3.37 at the 10th percentile to 3.93 to the 90th percentile. Again, those are for students that were accepted to Tufts. And the median MCAT for those who were accepted to Tufts in 2018 was a 514 with a range of 507 in the 10th percentile to 520 in the 90th percentile. Tufts is instituting a new curriculum this year, which we're going to be talking about and hearing more about during our conversation with Dr. Neumeyer. Also worth mentioning is that Tufts has some really special programs in primary care through their Maine track. That's Maine as in the state of Maine, M-A-I-N-E. And some special elective opportunities, which we get into some detail about as well. The grading system in the first 2 years is pass-fail, and they, like many other schools, have a tiered system in the third and fourth year of honors, high pass, pass, low pass, and fail. Notably, Tufts has over 15 affiliated hospitals where their students train, and Dr. Neumeyer is going to give us some insight into how that works during our conversation. So there's a little bit of background on Tufts. Let me give you some info on Dr. Neumeyer. For the past 22 years, Dr. David Neumeyer has been intimately involved in the clinical work, teaching, and academic endeavors of the Department of Pulmonary and Critical Care Medicine at the Leahy Hospital and Medical Center in Burlington, Massachusetts. Dr. Neumeyer is a pulmonary critical care and sleep specialist, and his clinical responsibilities have been extensive in caring for patients in the pulmonary clinic, inpatient pulmonary consult service, and the intensive care unit. Additionally, he developed and was the program director for a very successful and highly regarded sleep fellowship program. Dr. Neumeyer has a passion for teaching and mentoring, and almost daily can be found teaching medical students, residents, fellows, and staff. Since 2006, Dr. Neumeyer has had dual roles, not only as an accomplished specialist in clinical medicine, but also as the Dean for Admissions at the Tufts University School of Medicine. In his admissions role, he's been very active regionally and nationally, working with pre-health advisors and admissions colleagues, as well with many academic and administrative programs within the School of Medicine. So there's the background on Dr. Neumeyer. We have a really fun conversation, and we get into a lot of details, obviously, about Tufts, and we also spend some time at the end going over listener questions. So keep those questions coming in, allaccess@case.edu. But without any further ado, let's dive right into it with Dr. David Neumeyer of Tufts University School of Medicine. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It is a pleasure to be here, Christian.
Oh, this is so fun to have you here. I'm really grateful for your time today. We have a lot to cover. I've been doing my homework about Tufts, so you have a lot of exciting things, especially coming this year, that I want to touch on. But before we get into that, you have a very impressive professional bio. What would you like people to know about you from a kind of a personal perspective? Is there something you'd like to share?
Well, I think what's important for people to know about me is that my goal was never to become an administrator at a medical school. I actually had no intent of that. It kind of fell upon me by chance, and it's been a great decision and a wonderful experience, but not something that I intended to do really ever in my life.
So how did it kind of fall into your lap to become the Dean of Admissions at Tufts?
Well, I joined the admissions committee, and I joined the admissions committee years ago when the hospital I work at, Leahy, became a Tufts teaching affiliate. And I thought the admissions committee would be a fun way to expand my career outside of the hospital box and do something to affect the type of applicants that are getting accepted to medical school, to make sure that the right people are going into medical school. And I wanted to be involved with that firsthand. And then there was a turnover in the dean's position a few years later, and I was asked to apply. But it was really something I didn't feel I was qualified for, nor did I really want to give up my work at the hospital. Mm-hmm. And then I went through the interview process, was offered the position, and I thought about it. It was certainly a great honor. And then I realized that it would be somewhat foolish of me not to take the position. I could try it out and see how it fits. And I was given a pretty good, solid commitment from the hospital that if things didn't work out, I could come back on my prior capacity. And that was about 12, 13 years ago, and here I am.
Wow. Yeah. So what do you find most rewarding about this admissions stuff and work that we do? What do you like about it?
There are just so many things that I like about it. I'm a very sociable person, so interacting with people has been fun. I think a few highlights of what I like. First of all, you're probably familiar with several of the studies that have come out about physician burnout. Mm-hmm. And we all experience it. Some of us experience it more significantly than others. But being involved in admissions is really refreshing. Seeing just fantastic people, hearing their stories, reading their bios and their experiences and their personal statements is really refreshing and makes me feel very proud of being part of the profession and invigorates me on a daily basis. Yeah. I'm also really happy about working with a great group of people. The administrators, professors, and students here at Tufts are fantastic, and I meet people from medical schools around the country and colleges around the country who are similarly just wonderful people, and that's been really a breath of fresh air for me to see how many people across the country really want to make the admissions process make it good, make it worthwhile, make it best for the applicants, and fill the medical schools with people that really do care about medicine now and in the future. Yeah, we really do work in a great community of people that want to make this,
put things together, like, from the AAMC and then consortiums that we have in our regions to really help students and advise them and all work together to, like you said, make the admissions process a good, hopefully a good experience for people. Right. Let me ask you this. What's something you find people are surprised to learn about you?
Wow. I think probably people might be surprised to know that I really was not particularly interested in medicine when I was younger.
Oh, yeah.
It developed over time. And that part of my reason, I was always interested in science, but I wasn't interested in medicine, I think, because I was intimidated by it. Oh. I didn't think I was smart enough. I didn't think I was good enough. I didn't think I was committed enough. So I turned my interest towards other things. And it wasn't until later on in life, actually after college, that I became interested in medicine and really committed myself to going into medical school at that time.
So how many years out of college were you? Kind of what we would call a non-traditional student now?
Back then, I was very non-traditional because I'm an old guy now. I'm 58. So back then, it was unusual for people to take time off before they went to medical school. The common things that people did back then, if they took time off, were service requirements. For example, military or Peace Corps types or significant scholarship type academic programs. But it was unusual for people to do the type of things that people do nowadays to just gain worldly experience to go into medicine. So I just took 2 years off, and I did research working in a lab here in Boston. And it was during that time that I was inspired to go into medicine.
Do you find you have kind of an affinity for the non-trad kind of applicants because of your background?
I don't know if I would say I have an affinity for it. I think the number of non-traditional applicants has exploded, and at our school and at many other schools around the country, from what I understand, the percentage of non-traditional applicants exceeds the percentage of traditional applicants these days. So we have, I think, 70% of our students in this year's incoming class had taken at least a year off prior to their matriculation. Yeah,
we are all seeing that, aren't we? Well, let's dive into, you have an exciting year coming up here at Tufts, and you kind of told me that you have a curricular reform that's taken place and you have a new curriculum being implemented for this entering class of 2019. So tell us about some of the highlights coming down the road in this new curriculum.
Sure. So we can talk about why we made the change, and maybe that's a good way to start.
What was the impetus?
So the impetus is not because there was anything wrong with our prior curriculum. The impetus stems from several different things. The first is that as an accredited site, an accredited medical school from the AAMC, it is a requirement that we look at our curriculum every so often and consider changes to it. But in addition to that, as the spirit of the school is to always make improvements in what we do. And as medical education and education in general has changed, we try to improve upon the way we do things to make sure that we're satisfying different learning types, learning strategies, and also to make sure that we can cover certain topics in medicine that haven't traditionally been covered well in medical school. And then finally, trying to make sure that we give students a very, very strong foundation in medicine that prepares people for the complexities of practicing medicine in the future. And in the historical past, when I went to medical school, there was a lot of learning and a lot of repeated learning that went on in medical school, and the depth of what students had to learn back then was far greater than what students learn in today's world, because in today's world, the breadth of information is so vast and the pace of scientific discovery is so rapid that it's really important to prepare students to have sort of a solid foundation so that they can be prepared for the changes that will occur in medicine, regardless of what type of change that happens.
Absolutely. So that's the framework for, the reason behind going through all, because a curricular change, that's a big decision to make. So
it is, and a lot of work went into it.
I bet.
So and you can imagine the number of committees and people involved. But what's one thing that's really nice about what makes Tufts tick is that all of the committees have students involved in them, and every decision that happens here at the medical school is student focused. So the students give obviously a real unique perspective on things, particularly when it comes to curriculum, and their input is really highly regarded and helped shape things in the new curriculum as well as the previous curriculum.
So what were some of the changes compared to the previous curriculum and this new one? What would be some of the highlights?
So some of the highlights of the new curriculum are that we start a little bit earlier, just a week earlier. Okay. So that's not too drastic. And we end the basic science, so to speak, pre-clerkship part of the curriculum a little bit earlier as well. So the actual time in the classroom is probably less than it was previously. But some highlights include, I'll sort of go through them one by one. The first is that there are 4 key threads, or sort of academic threads, that are woven into the curriculum at Tufts. And these threads are fairly broad-based, but the first one is something that pertains to healthcare systems. So understanding the complexities of healthcare systems we think is really important for our medical students. Understanding population health, which includes social justice, cultural competency, understanding the patient care experience, which is our third thread, which is understanding what it's like for a patient to experience things, which includes end-of-life care, palliative care, pain and substance abuse issues. And then, of course, the final thread is personal and professional development, which attests to the medical student and their wellness, resiliency, professionalism, leadership skills, teaching, clinical reasoning, and, of course, ethics. So those themes are woven into everything that is done during all 4 years.
Okay. Wow.
But our class, actually, the curriculum actually starts with a 3-week session at the very beginning of your first year with a course on the healthcare systems. So you start out with a 3-week course that really teaches you about the healthcare systems before you dive into a system, an organ system approach to medicine. So the organ systems approach is a little bit different than how we did things before. So it's obviously organ system based. But what we've done is you learn about pathophysiology and basic science in an integrative approach, so that we have taken away the anatomy course, for example, and integrated anatomy into the organ systems approach. So, for example, if you're in the cardiology section, you might be learning about the heart, and then during that section, you will also go to the anatomy lab and dissect that portion of your cadaver that pertains to the organ system that you're studying.
That's great. I mean, so you're learning, so you're kind of in the thoracic cavity then at that point, doing the anatomy there. Very cool. That's great.
Right. Mm-hmm. We have something called selectives, and selectives are a experience that students can take between 1 and 4 selectives, typically done during the first year. And these selectives are basically career exploratory opportunities. So they can be it's really very broad-based, and students spend a half day in an afternoon a week on one of their selectives. So if, for example, you're interested in becoming a thoracic surgeon, you could do a selective in thoracic surgery, or you may choose to do a selective in public health or some other opportunity. It's very broad-based, and the selective opportunities are vast. But it's a very sort of hands-on, personal way for students to gain experience outside the classroom in a variety of different areas within medicine.
So it sounds like these
Other
selectives
aspects,
are kind of like a all access pass, if you like. It's like something you've been dreaming about as a pre-med, and now you get there and you've got this all access pass to go check out whether it's population health or, like you said, the cardiothoracic surgery you've always kind of wanted to get in on, but you couldn't do it as a pre-med because you just didn't have that kind of access. So that sounds really fascinating. Right. Oh, that's
and it
cool.
might completely change a student's perspective on what they want to do. We have students come in who are absolutely convinced they want to be ophthalmologists or orthopedic surgeons or, a variety of different specialties. And then they do a selective, and it either confirms their interest in that, and then they can prepare themselves for that particular specialty as they go through medical school, or they may say, no, this is actually not right for me. I'm interested in doing something different. So it's a nice sort of jumpstart to help them prepare for the next step.
I interrupted you a second ago. Was there something else you were going to add as a part of the highlights?
So a few other things. Another few highlights that have been added. We have a boot camp that has been added to the curriculum. The first boot camp is done right at the end of second year, preparing you for the third year. And it basically helps you gain some of the skill sets that are necessary to go into the hospital and be part of a healthcare team. And that might be a session on hearing cases and presenting information about a patient. It might be navigating the electronic medical record system at our various teaching sites. And so a variety of things are done just to give students a sense of confidence that they know how to function as third and fourth year medical students. And then we have a similar one done at the end of their fourth year to prepare them for their internships. And so that's been very popular.
Yeah. I bet.
And we have a slightly longer study session for step one of the boards than we had before, along with a board prep course that students can take.
That's a common question we get, isn't it? People always want to know, how long do I get to study for boards?
Yeah, it's kind of an unfortunate aspect of the way healthcare has become. There's so much emphasis on step one of the boards for residency matching programs. And it's a bit unfortunate, but that's sort of the world we live in now. And so we want to make sure that our students are best prepared for the competitiveness of the match process.
How long do they get to study for boards?
They get about 8 weeks.
Yeah, that's a good chunk of time.
It's a good chunk of time, yeah. Where it was 6 weeks prior to this.
I was reading on one of the websites that does Tufts offer some USMLE prep programs, or are students on their own to study for step one?
So there's both. There is a formal prep program, but they also study on their own.
Okay. Let me ask you, in the first 2 years, is the curriculum a combination of lectures, small group, case-based learning? What's that? Was that one of the changes that went into this new curriculum as well?
Yeah, and that's actually a really interesting question, because some medical schools have completely eliminated lectures or traditional lectures. And we thought about that and decided that we wanted to keep some. And part of the reason was that there's both consistency and efficiency of teaching in large lectures. And there's also a good chunk of students actually prefer that type of lecturing. And it's easy to make up. If, for example, a student is sick or has to miss a day, it's much easier to make up the information that's obtained from a traditional PowerPoint lecture than it is from a, say, reverse classroom teaching type model or case-based discussion. So from a practical perspective, from a learning perspective, and for a quality control perspective, we think this is actually a good reason to keep at least some lectures in place, but the volume of traditional lectures will be much less. So students will typically have about 10 courses or 10 course sessions per week, as opposed to now, which is more than that. But that will be mixed between a variety of different teaching styles, which will include traditional lectures, also case-based learning, problem-based learning, and reverse classroom teaching models.
Did I see that? Okay, so in the past, or maybe this is going to continue, there was a research concentration program. Is that going to be maintained in the new curriculum, or did I read correctly that research is now going to be required of all students?
So you are correct on both.
Oh, okay.
The two are actually independent.
Okay.
So what we have a relatively small MD PhD program where we have 5 students per year in that program, but we have a lot of students who have significant interest in research.
Right.
Who may want to be involved in research more than just a traditional MD would allow for, but maybe not so much to consider an MD PhD program. Mm-hmm. So we offer, actually, there are 2 different options that run in parallel to each other. The first is the research concentration program that you mentioned, and the second is the active citizenship concentration program, which is very similar in terms of how it works. Now, most of the students that do this typically take 6 months or a year off between their 3rd and 4th year, but it isn't required that it's done at that time, but that's the most common time when it's done. And for the research concentration program, they choose a research topic of interest to them and pursue it during that time frame. The citizenship concentration program is more loose or less defined, but it's basically students are doing service type projects. They get involved with policy work, healthcare policy work, or other types of things. We've had students get different types of academic grants to help them study a variety of different things, both locally and nationally and internationally for the active citizenship concentration program. So these are also for students who may need a break, may need an academic break. Sometimes students feel like before they dive into residency, they feel like they just want to take some time off and do something worthwhile in medicine, but also gain these types of valuable experiences.
And in the new curriculum, then research will be required of all, like some type of scholarly work will be required of all students.
Yeah. So in the new curriculum, there will be a scholarly project that will be required, and there are times during the curriculum, particularly during the 3rd and the 4th year, that students will have the opportunities to do those scholarly projects. So it's really like a capstone project, just to, because one of our core missions at the school is to improve the quality of healthcare, and one way of doing that is by performing research. But this kind of research does not have to be wet lab type research. It can be done in a variety of different ways based on the student's interest.
Yeah.
So we think that's a valuable experience for students.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
One other thing I wanted to touch on too, while we had you here today, is you're the first school that I'm talking with that has a community service requirement. The students have to do some community service hours. So can you walk us through kind of what that looks like for students? How do they get involved in the community, and what does that look like?
So that's also a really interesting question that probably has a little bit of history that you might not realize. So we started doing this years ago, and what we found is that our students were already doing it. The type of students that we select tend to be students that are very involved in what we call here a Tufts active citizenship or community service work. And we wanted to sort of highlight that by giving recognition to the students, because so many of them do it already, that we thought we'd make it into a course requirement. And that's really the basis of how it started. And most of the students who applied to us actually feel that that's a wonderful thing, because it sort of highlights what they love doing anyhow, what they're passionate about. And so our students are very involved in the community here in Boston. We're located in Chinatown, which is one of the poorest neighborhoods in Boston, but it's a neighborhood in significant transition. And there's just a lot of people in need immediately in our neighborhood. And then we are also very involved in a student-run health clinic called the Sherwood Project that's been around over 25 years now. Yeah. And the Sherwood Project is something that many of our students get involved in and are really very, very passionate about and help with providing primary care and even specialty care to a community of very needy patients.
Let me ask you one other thing when it comes to opportunities, and that would be students always ask us about global opportunities. Like, I wanted, what kind of relationships do you have or opportunities do you have for me to do things internationally? And from the homework I did, it looks like Tufts has a pretty robust set of things to do. So what does that look like?
Yeah, so we do. Our school, our dean, our big dean of the school, Dean Berman, is actually a global health person. And he actually spent 3 years in the Peace Corps in India. And so his interest in public health is really based on his own passions and experiences. And so we have a dean for global health. She's also our Dean of Multicultural Affairs, Dean Saki, and she has helped initiate several opportunities for our students that are interested in global health across the country. And I think in addition to the inspiration from within, there's also a lot of inspiration from without, externally. The current applicant pool seems really interested in global health opportunities to gain experiences around the world. And that's, I think, a wonderful thing. And I think many medical schools across the country have taken that to bat and give students opportunities. So our opportunities formally exist in the countries of Haiti, Ghana, Namibia, India, Panama, and Nicaragua. So, and our students are very involved. Some of these programs are geared slightly more to students interested in public health for the public health students, and others are more geared clinically or geared for students that are regular mainstream students.
Is there a particular time when students tend to do these experiences during their 4 years? When do students usually do these?
Yeah, so the most common experience is during the first summer, because that obviously is when students have time off. But there are other opportunities that occur during the course of the year.
Okay. All right. Wow. And are students able to do, because I get this question a lot, are students able to do international electives? Would you consider these electives, or are there other opportunities to do maybe some of their fourth year things in other countries?
Yeah, I'm not 100% certain to the answer to that. I know that students do international electives. What I don't know is how that translates into credit. Okay. Oh, yeah. So I think that it has to be done. It's done through the Student Affairs Office and the Registrar's Office to make sure that the electives that they're doing are credit worthy. But in addition, we want to make sure that the students are going to places that are safe and educationally valuable. Yeah. Usually it's the safety factor that we're most concerned about. Absolutely. It hasn't happened, fortunately, to any of our students, but we just want to make sure that they're not putting themselves into a situation that might put them in any sort of harm's way.
Yeah. One more thing I wanted to ask you, David, about Tufts. Another interesting or special programs that you have would be the Maine track. And it looks like Tufts has a commitment to primary care. I mean, can you tell us some more about the Maine track? Because that seems unique.
Yeah, so we are really proud of our Maine track program, which is a relatively new part of our school. About 10, 11 years ago, we linked up with Maine Medical Center. And Maine, as you may know, does not have an allopathic medical school. It has a very good osteopathic medical school, but does not have an allopathic medical school. And Maine is also a significantly underserved state for medical care. And so the goal of the Maine track is basically to produce physicians who are interested in staying and practicing in the state of Maine. And much of the needs for the state of Maine include primary care, particularly in rural areas. Maine is a really interesting state, and the coast of Maine, if you go 100 or 200 yards in, is one of the wealthiest strips of land in the country. But as soon as you breach that, it tapers off very quickly, and there's a lot of poverty and educational disparity and need for sort of educational support and medical support in the state. And so we've been really fortunate to work with Maine Medical Center, and it's currently 40 students out of our class of 200 are part of the Maine Track program.
Oh, wow.
So they have a slightly different admissions process, and their curriculum is slightly different. But it is really focused on trying to attract people from the state of Maine or people who have interest in working in a place like the state of Maine to come to the Maine Track program.
Do the students that are in those 40 students that are in the Maine Track, do they do the first 2 years there in Boston and then go to Maine for the third and fourth year? What are the logistics involved with that?
Yeah, so the curriculum is going to change this coming year in our new curriculum, where in the past, the students would spend 2 years in Boston and then 2 years in Maine. The current curriculum, or the new curriculum, will be 1 year in Boston and 3 years in Maine. So the second year curriculum will be taught by faculty up at Maine Medical Center. The subject and content will be the same. It'll just be different lecturers.
But the students get more immersed in the state or in that environment earlier, right?
Correct. Correct. And the third year rotations are both traditional third and fourth year rotations, just like most students do, where you do a block of surgery, a block of medicine, et cetera, through the various different teaching sites within the state of Maine. But as an alternative, about half of the Maine Track students will be involved in a longitudinal integrative clerkship, or LIC, program, which is where you are assigned a population of patients within a healthcare system. So you may go to a rural teaching site and be involved with a population of patients, and so your care is much, or your learning becomes much more integrated, where you might spend a day taking out somebody's gallbladder and providing post-operative care to that person. You might give prenatal care to a pregnant woman and help deliver the baby, and manage all the family issues that go on with that. So it is much more akin to what a primary care doctor's role would be in not just a rural setting, even in an urban setting, as opposed to piecemeal type learning that happens in the current system. Since we're talking about, you touched on the third and fourth year. Just one thing that I noticed in doing some research on your schools, that you have your students, you have affiliations with over 15 hospitals. And I know that's right.
Tufts Medical Center is right across the street from the medical school. But so how does that, that sounds like a great opportunity for students to have access to all these hospitals. How does that work for students in doing their clinical training in all those hospitals?
Well, I think it's a great opportunity as well, but it's not for everybody. And the reason why I say that is because where in some medical schools, they just have a few affiliated hospitals. We have, like you said, over 15, and each hospital is slightly different. So Boston has a lot of hospitals, or Massachusetts has a lot of hospitals, and we tend to have smaller hospitals than in many other parts of the country. But each hospital is slightly different. The patient populations, the way the hospitals practice, the spirit of the hospitals are slightly different. So by going through different teaching sites in multiple different hospitals and clinical settings, you gain experiences that you wouldn't necessarily gain by just staying in one place.
Mm-hmm.
And so that does require some traveling for the students and some degree of independence, and maybe being a little gaining comfort and being outside of their comfort zone, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
because you may have to travel in the morning 20 or 30 minutes to get to a teaching site.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, I think the gain exceeds the downside for our students. Our students seem to be very happy with the current situation. Now, you might be doing rotations right here at the medical center, and the Tufts Medical Center it is sort of across the street. It's also connected by a bridge, so you don't even have to go outside to get to the medical center from the medical school. And the children's hospital, what's called the floating hospital, is similarly connected to the medical center and the medical school.
Oh, that's great. So do students submit a location preference, or are they just kind of assigned to where they go?
Yeah, there are preferences. So there's a system in place that's run during the second year to sort of allow students an opportunity to make their selection, and also not just the location of where they want to be, but also the timing of when they want to do their rotations.
Yeah, I know that's important to students. We try to touch on a little bit of everything on especially, the new curriculum you guys have coming down the road. Is there anything else that I didn't bring up that you feel is important for people to hear or know about Tufts?
A few other things might be worth talking about. Our combined degree programs.
Oh yeah, let's talk about that.
And our Health Justice Scholars Program. Those are probably two things that are worth talking about. And the last thing, actually, I didn't mention is our coaching model, and I'll talk about that last. So the combined degree programs, we have several different combined degree programs. There's a traditional fully funded MD PhD program that I mentioned earlier that has room for 5 students per year. That runs in a traditional MD PhD model, 2 years of medical school, typically 3 years of PhD work, and then 2 years of medical school.
Okay.
The other combined degree programs are 4-year programs, or 2 4-year programs, MBA program, which is taught through the Heller School of Management at Brandeis University, which is in Waltham, Massachusetts, and an MPH program that's also a 4-year program through our own MPH school.
Okay.
So those students will take classes during the summer, particularly the first summer, and the MBA students will actually start about a month early or 2 months early. In fact, our MBA students from this current cycle started this week already.
Oh, wow.
And those students, the MBA students, actually take classes on Tuesday afternoon, which limits their ability to do the selectives on Tuesday afternoons.
So it's a trade-off.
But they're gaining, it's a trade-off, right? But they are gaining 2 degrees in 4 years, as opposed to most medical schools where you need to take a full year off.
Yeah.
And so
that's unique.
Yeah, so it's, again, not for everybody. I know when I was a medical student, I probably wouldn't have been able to handle that. But some of our students are whippersnappers and can do it, and they seem to be really happy, and it's been great. They get involved and they do work with the administrators at the various different teaching hospitals, and do great opportunities for learning and research and stuff. So it's been very successful, both of those programs.
Can I ask you a quick question about that? About how does the tuition work? Is there reduced tuition when you're taking on an additional degree like that for the business school? How does that play in?
No, it's actually it's an increased tuition, but it is still more cost effective than doing it in a 5th year.
Okay.
So when you add in the sort of the lost wage that you would have for taking the year off, the combined degree program turns out to be economically viable.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense.
So the 4th combined degree program is a little more unusual. At our undergraduate campus in Medford, there is a graduate program called the Fletcher School. And the Fletcher School is a school of law and diplomacy that is really a school that's geared for people who are interested in like ambassadorship in countries around the world.
Oh, wow.
And so our students have the opportunity to be part of that school where they can get a combined degree at the Fletcher School, a master's and at the Fletcher School, and an MD at the same time. And so they take a year of work in the Fletcher School. It's essentially a deferment year where they study at the Fletcher School and then become a medical student for 4 years.
Wow.
So those students tend to be interested in international healthcare policy akin to the World Health Organization.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. Wow. How many students do that?
So I'm sorry?
How many students typically do that Fletcher program?
So it's typically one student a year.
Okay.
We have room for more than that, but we get a lot of students who are interested in that program and talk about it during their application. But ultimately, it typically translates to about one student a year that does it.
Yeah, that's a big commitment, and
it's a big commitment.
Yeah. So, so we've kind of touched on everything. What is something that you find that you wish people knew about Tufts that you'd like people to know, that maybe when you go and visit undergrads or you're doing pre-med talks, is there any kind of misconception or something about Tufts that you like to tell people about that they can't find on fancy websites and things like that?
Yeah. Well, I think when people come to Boston, they have a perception about what education, particularly medical education, is like here in Boston. There's a sense that us physicians, educators, medical students, et cetera, in Boston are pompous and arrogant. And that's just so far from the truth here at Tufts. We like to say that, you can check your arrogance code in at the door, because we're really looking for people that are humble and nice and interesting and fun to work with. And it's just not that way at all. So people, when they leave here, are just so surprised about how nice people are and how warm and welcoming they are. And it's almost like we come from the Midwest.
Right. That's what's sometimes I interview people from the Northeast and I say, what's something that surprised you since you've been here in Cleveland? Like how nice everybody is.
Yeah. Well, it's true. People are nice. I think there's in the Northeast, because, it tends to be crowded here. Yeah. Not the whole Northeast is crowded, but people tend to be a little more reserved in terms of their demeanor. And it's not that they're nice people, they just tend to be a little more reserved. Yeah. And so once you sort of understand that about people, you realize how, nice people are nice all over the world. And you just have to understand that people are different, they're slightly different in the way they express themselves.
And just because somebody's reserved doesn't mean they're not friendly. It just, that's
right. Yeah. That's right.
Well, we've talked about these great things that Tufts offers and the new curriculum coming down the road. I think that's maybe enticed some people to be thinking, all right, this sounds great. Now, how do I get in? Like, what's the process?
How do you get in?
Yeah. How do we get, to kind of switch gears here and kind of talk about the admissions process, let's start to talk about what's the screening process like. I mentioned, you and I talked before we got on the call that you have a combination of competency-based prerequisites and regular prerequisites. So let's kind of start there. If you could explain to people how does your competency-based prerequisites work when you're starting to evaluate, or people are starting to evaluate themselves, are they eligible to apply to Tufts?
Sure. So we, as an admissions committee, met about, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago to readdress our pre-med requirements. And we were dealing with a situation, as many medical schools were, of enhancing additive pre-med requirements. So, for example, a simple example might be chemistry. Many schools require 4 semesters of chemistry and biochemistry, which makes it 5 semesters. Sociology, psychiatry, statistics, English, math, physics, and the requirements kept on adding because people wanted their medical students to come to medical school as prepared as possible, because medical education is, so rapid and there's so much to learn that it was felt that the more people had in terms of foundation, the better off they would be. we decided that that's all true, but we also felt there's a huge value in getting a strong liberal arts education. And the value of the strong liberal arts education actually comes forward later on in your medical training, in your medical career.
Good point.
And so we wanted to make sure that students weren't just pre-programmed for medicine during their undergraduate years, but they had the opportunity to take a broad array of different coursework to prepare themselves for medical school. Nor did we want to become the medical school, the only medical school in the country that required a particular class to exclude students from applying to us. And then finally, we wanted to make sure that we understood that not all medical students go through a traditional pathway to prepare themselves for medical school. And that, many students go to privileged universities around our country and study in a typical manner, but other students don't have those opportunities. And we've had students who, for example, are working in some of the remote islands in Alaska doing their military obligation, and they're taking courses online, and they don't have the opportunities for all the coursework and experiences that other students have. So we're trying to make sure that our pre-med requirements really met the sort of broad spectrum of applicants that exist out there, and to sort of incorporate all the different types of applicants and experiences people might have. So an example of our competencies, for example, we have a competency of the English language. And most of our applicants will say, I went to an English-speaking college, and my competency is based on that. I studied in an English-speaking college, and therefore I'm competent in English. We have a laboratory competency. So if, for example, your school's curriculum does not include the typical laboratory-based coursework that correlates to biology or chemistry, you could have gained your competency and laboratory experience by working in a lab for a couple of years, and that would achieve your competency and that kind of experience. So it's and statistics is another competency. So you don't have to take a statistics course. You may have learned statistics through working as an actuary in an insurance company, or taking a psych class, or studying on your own and learning statistics. So that's basically how we assess students, and we want to make it as open as possible. And we allow students to convey their competencies on the application, including their coursework that they've done to support their competencies and coursework requirements.
So that's done on the secondary application.
That's all done on the secondary application. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So students frequently ask us, so what are you looking for? Like, what are you looking for in us to be invited for an interview? So can you tell us, like, what are some of the characteristics or those values that you had mentioned earlier, that the students that you have at Tufts are very civic minded and interested in service? So what else may you be looking for in the application process that jumps out?
So that is absolutely true. Our admissions process mirrors in many ways our mission. So we're looking for people that are really giving, caring people that legitimately enjoy service work. We're looking for people that want to make medicine a better place in the future, and that can often be expressed by various types of research or discovery type processes. And again, that doesn't have to be bench research. It can be any type of research, public health research, history research, of any sort of thing to understand the academic process. We're looking for people, for example, in the Maine track who might meet the mission of the Maine track to work in a rural environment or work in a place like Maine. We're looking for people who are really good team players, people who are really nice. We're looking for diversity and all sorts of different aspects of diversity of education, diversity of interest, diversity of religion, diversity of ethnicity, to make the mix of students here as interesting and rich as possible.
That's one thing that sometimes frustrates me when you look at some resources that are out there that just are capturing race and ethnicity within a class, and you can't there's not a table that captures all that rich diversity that I think we're all looking for, that you mentioned, that's visible and invisible, right?
That's right. And it's hard. And So a good example of that is, for example, the LGBTQI community is sometimes really hard to assess for on an application. Some students feel very comfortable talking about it, others don't. So, it turns out we end up having a pretty rich environment here at the medical school in regards to that, but it's sometimes hard to screen for those types of students. And, I think the world is obviously improving in terms of our understanding of different communities around the country and around the world, and hopefully our admissions processes will similarly improve.
Yeah. We're going to talk in a little bit here at the end, talk about physician shadowing. But when it comes to medically related experiences, does your committee feel that this is a must-have type of experience, and if so, how much medically related experience? Pre-med's always like kind of want a number, sometimes, and sometimes there's not a number attached to it.
Yeah, we're very concrete people. I understand that. So let me just say, I think gaining experience in the medical system is pretty much a must. And the reason for that is, in the old days, it wasn't the case. But in the old days, a lot of students were disillusioned by the way medicine is. And so we think that it's really important for you to gain experiences in medicine to solidify your interest in the field, to make sure that you know what you're getting into and that it really is your passion. And that, in terms of numbers, is hard to quantify because it's really an individual experience. So there may be a relatively brief experience that solidifies your interest in medicine, and there may be something that is much, much longer that solidifies your experience in medicine. So it's not just about the hours, it's about the depth and the quality of the experiences that you've had.
Absolutely. One thing before we switch gears and go to that natural next step would be kind of getting the interview. One thing that might jump out at people is that Tufts gets a lot of applications, like 12,000 is what I saw last year. Yet you interview about 800. So how does that screening process work? People always ask us, do you pre-screen? And is there a pre-screening process? Am I just going to get thrown out because I don't have a certain GPA? So can you tell people what that screening kind of looks like?
Yeah. So, that is, the advantage of having a lot of applicants is that we end up getting a really great group of students that come here every year. The disadvantage is that there are a lot of really great students that don't get recognized in the process. And I think that's important to understand. I like to tell students that the glass half empty approach is that we have 12,000 applicants for 200 spots. But if you look at the national average, about 35% of students get in somewhere. So the odds of coming to Tufts don't look so good, but the odds of getting in somewhere are actually pretty good for good medical students that are applying. And so, I think we deal with this problem maybe to a slightly greater degree than other schools because we have so many applicants. We also have a slightly larger class than most schools because of our main track program. So it also should be understood that if you don't get recognized, it doesn't mean that you are not a great applicant, and that we just have too many really great applicants that apply, and we can only recognize so many for an interview. And that process of evaluating students helps us diversify our class. So we're including students from a lot of different undergraduate schools, from a lot of different parts of the country and the world, from a lot of different races and ethnicities around. And so, by diversifying the interview group, we are also hoping to diversify our class and make sure that the class represents somewhat what society represents, and to make sure that we have enough people who are willing to work with a variety of different populations that exist in Boston and other parts of the country.
I'm really glad you said that, David, because I want people to hear, and this has been kind of a theme that's been coming up, is that prospective applicants should know you have to be casting your net. And meaning you have to apply to a broad range of schools, for which it would seem that you kind of have a competitive profile. But it's hard on our end as admissions that we can't interview 12,000 people. We get like 7,500 applications. You just don't have the capacity to do that. But our hope is, if we have to turn somebody down from an interview, you hope that they're going to get an interview someplace else, that it's going to work out.
That's right.
We just can't pull the trigger, but hopefully somebody else can.
Right. And let's face it, there are a lot of really good medical schools across the country. And as much as, I love working at Tufts and being at Tufts, there are great medical schools in Boston and all over the country. And students do wonderful things when they graduate from medical school, regardless of where they go.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we've been screened. You get the invitation to come interview at Tufts. Tell us what the interview day is like there. Walk us through kind of what that experience is like when somebody arrives in Boston and they make the trip to Tufts Medical, to the medical school there for their interview day. What can they expect?
Well, the first thing they'll see is a big vat of coffee to welcome them, and some breakfast, and some friendly medical students to greet them. And we generally have information sessions in the morning. Several information sessions that includes a welcome from me, an overview of the curriculum, and a talk about research and financial aid, and talk about student affairs and diversity and multicultural affairs and global health opportunities. There is a luncheon that occurs after that, where the students meet with current first and second year students in a very informal way. And then the afternoon is broken up into interviews and a tour. So the students will interview with either two faculty members on the admissions committee, or a faculty member and a fourth year student on the admissions committee. And also get a tour and have the opportunity to talk with faculty and students about our combined degree programs.
When it comes to the interviews, they're one-on-one? Are they open file, completely open file? Is any information blinded to the interviewers, or how's that structured?
They are completely open filed interviews, and we ask our interviewers to read their files, their applications beforehand. There are occasional exceptions where that doesn't happen. And that might be, for example, a physician on our committee might have been involved in an emergency situation where they can't make it. And last minute we switch the interviewer with somebody else. But generally speaking, it's an open file, and we do it that way intentionally, not to bias or pre-bias the interviewer, but to allow for us to ask questions about the applicant, and also allow the applicant to address issues on their application to support themselves and their interests.
Is there any part of the interview that's structured, like there are certain questions that have to be asked, or is it just, do the interviewers are given a certain set of areas they have to evaluate, and how they arrive to them is up to the interviewer?
Yeah, so it's much more sort of broad-based. There are semi-structured components to it, but it really is very much broad-based. And, if you interview with me, you might have a completely different set of questions than interviewing with somebody else. And my questions might completely differ from applicant to applicant based on the background and the person that I'm interviewing. So what we're really trying to find out through an interview should be no surprise to anybody. We are sizing up your communication skills, and we're making sure that you have an understanding and the types of things that you did. So if you, for example, did research, we want to hear about your research. In fact, for me, it is one of the main sources of information that I get about research is I hear it from our applicants. They teach me so much, and it inspires me to read more about it. But every once in a while, you might come across an applicant that doesn't really know much about what's on their application, and that can obviously be a disadvantage to them.
Yeah, I think that's important for people to hear. You really have to know your application going into the interview.
That's right.
Go back and
now, I should also mention that up in Maine, we have a hybrid model where the applicants go through two traditional, but briefer traditional interview stations, but then have 7 MMI stations, multiple mini interview stations.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Do you ever foresee moving MMI down to main campus, to downtown?
We think about it. We certainly do think about it. I think what we'll more likely be doing is potentially having more structured traditional interviews. But at this point, we haven't had the strong impetus to bring MMIs here. We feel that there are clear, distinct advantages to MMIs, but also some disadvantages.
We're in the same boat here at Case. I kind of thought about it, but we haven't made it. There hasn't been something that's made us say we need to change what we're doing because there's a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What would you want students to know about the interview day or coming to Tufts? How long are there interviews with these two admissions committee members? Are they an hour?
So there are 50 minutes allotted for each interview, but the interviews typically last for about 30 to 40 minutes in length.
Okay.
And then there's a little time in between where the interviewer can prepare for the next interview and the applicant can prepare for the next interview as well.
Are there any tips that you give people on the interview day to keep in mind when they're coming to Tufts to interviews, or anything you'd like people to know about coming in for that interview day with you guys?
Yeah, I mean, most of what I want to do, my goal is to make everyone relax and be themselves. And I know that's hard because obviously you're trying to be professional and we want you to relax. We feel like we get a much better assessment of people when they're relaxed as opposed to when they're uptight. And so much of what we're trying to do is just make sure that they feel comfortable. I think what's important for students before they come to the interview is to make sure that they get a good night's sleep the night before. Yeah. They prepare to arrive about 30 minutes earlier than they're supposed to arrive, so there's no stress in the process. And Boston is well known for its traffic, so that you just need to add a little extra time to your day to make sure that you're getting here on time. Yeah. Read about the school, have some prepared questions. I find it's totally okay to have those questions written down because your mind is going at 90 miles an hour and sometimes people forget the questions that they had prepared. And so write down the questions that you want to ask. And I always find it's totally okay to ask me the same questions that they asked another interviewer because they might actually get different answers. Sure. Not because they're being factually incorrect, but because they're different perspectives on different questions.
I guess the natural next step to talk about would be, so after the interview, we move to admissions committee. So how does the admissions committee process work? How often do you meet? How are you enrolling admissions, or are there set dates that your decisions are going out?
Yeah, we're on rolling admissions, and we meet as a committee about every 4 to 5 weeks, so pretty much on a monthly basis. And the admissions committee is comprised of a fairly large group of faculty and fourth-year students, and all of those who are involved in interviewing on that particular month are come to the committee meeting, and occasionally others come as well. And each student is discussed in some degree of detail. And then the decision is made on their application. Typically, the decisions are to accept, to hold, or to reject. And what we try to do is, accept enough students to begin filling our class, but it's always hard to predict who's going to be coming to interview with us down the road. And so we want to make sure there's a little wiggle room to accept some students later on in the process who are in that sort of hold category. Yeah.
So going to the hold category, this is explained very nicely on your website, actually, which I really appreciated. If student says, "Oh, I'm on the wait list now," how do they let you know? Do you like getting updates? Do you accept them? Is it helpful to you?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I think that the typical updates that we get during the course of the year, let me step back slightly to say that we accept updates, and we don't tell students how often or how much they can update their application or contact us. We feel that this whole process is a bit of an expression of an applicant's personality, for good or for bad. So we certainly don't want to hear from applicants every week, and maybe even every month might be too much.
Yeah.
But an occasional update, particularly if it's a substantial change in their application, might be warranted. If they have a major publication, if they won a Nobel Peace Prize, something that's pretty substantial might be worth notifying us in the process of the application. During the waitlist part, we assume that everyone on our wait list wants to come to our school. And so it doesn't require students to highlight that any further. Although, on occasion where we have a handful of students that we think are all equally really good, and one student has been in contact us with saying, we really want to come to Tufts. It's my first choice. Then that student might get a slight leg up in the process. But generally speaking, we have a fairly structured list, and we go by that list. That is designed to sort of make the waitlist process a little more structured.
Yeah, but I think it's important for people to hear that if the student really has a deep desire to attend your school or at another school, that express that to us. It's helpful for us to hear that, especially as we get a little closer to these, significant dates of getting close to matriculation and now they commit to enroll kind of thing. Anything could happen. And if we have to make a call, that's, you kind of want to know who can we go to right now? Right.
And the current system with the new Choose Your Medical School tool, as we're all starting to learn about it a little more, it sort of allows for that by the plan to enroll and commit to enroll. Students can choose that, but that's only for the accepted students, not for the students that are on the wait list. So there's really not much of a mechanism for students. And I think, in truth, most students just want to get in somewhere. We totally understand that.
Yep.
That's really, and that should be the goal, is just to get in somewhere. And if you get into more than one place, then you're really privileged.
Any last minute, any kind of final thoughts about your admissions committee process that you think is important for people to know about, kind of how your process works after the interview?
So I would say about our admissions committee that we are a group of people with a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different interests, and a lot of different personalities. And that is done absolutely intentionally. And that we have some very common themes that, in terms of what we want our school to look like and our students admitted to be like. But that vision is very broad-based. So when you interview with people, it's somewhat random in terms of who you're chosen to interview with. But the interview process is the person that you interview with may be me, it may be someone else, it may be a fourth-year medical student, it may be another faculty member, but we are all human beings with a strong passion to make sure that the students coming in here are really great people. Yeah.
So kind of trust the process.
Hopefully so. We do our best, and I can't say we're perfect. We're far from perfect, but we really do appreciate feedback, constructive feedback, and understand that things don't always work out as smoothly as possible. But we really try our best to make the applicants feel comfortable and respected.
Yeah, I think that's, how many days a week do you interview? You're doing 800 interviews.
2 days.
2 days a week.
Yeah, 2 days a week.
So, I think applicants need to know sometimes that, we're doing this 2 days a week from September to February or August to March or something. Like every once in a while, some days just don't go as smoothly as you'd hope. And we do our best to try to maybe smooth it out or to let them know like, something, goofed up today and it's just kind of throwing us off, but we're aiming to get back on track. And so we really try to put our best foot out there every day because we know it's their first time visiting us and maybe the only time visiting us, but stuff does come up from time to time.
Yeah. No, it's a tricky business. and dealing with a lot of different people, a lot of different personalities, and the complexities of the process. And the same thing holds true, is that we understand that our day, the way we perform every day, is not always 100% perfect. And we also understand, as an applicant, you may come here and not have a perfect day too.
Exactly.
We understand that.
Yeah. Just to kind of wrap things up here, you've brought up that Tufts is located in Boston, and Boston's a great city. Where do students live there? Where do medical students live there? Is there housing that's arranged for them? Are they kind of on their own? Do they live near the med school? How does that work?
Yeah, there is housing. There's housing right across the street, but it doesn't have the capacity to meet the needs of all our students. It's more of a dorm style type complex, but it's very popular for many of the first year students. But because we're in a city, there's plenty of housing opportunities that exist in the immediate neighborhood and within the city and within the suburbs. So we have some students who live at home still and take the commute. They commute to school with our public transportation system, the MBTA, better known as the T. We have students that drive. We have students that bicycle. We have students that jog in the morning. We have students that walk from their apartments if they're not too far away. And some students who have already lived in the area, already have apartments, already have roommates, may have families that they live with their spouse, maybe their children. So it's really all over the place. And some students prefer to live very close to campus for convenience. Other students prefer to live a further away to get a little bit of a break. Yeah.
So it sounds like you've been in Boston. Did you grow up there?
I did. Yeah. I have been in Boston most of my life, except for a few educational blips where I went elsewhere.
Yeah. What do you do for fun in Boston?
What do I do for fun? Yeah. Well, Boston is a very vibrant city. There's a lot going on. I was going to say for fun, last night I watched the Bruins game, but that turned out not to be so fun for us.
That's so fun for us.
In retrospect, it was a privilege to be able to play that game, even though we didn't win. Hats off to the St. Louis crowd.
Yeah.
But there's a lot going on. So in addition, there's theater, there are great restaurants. I'm very sort of physically involved. I exercise a lot. I love spending time with my kids. Unfortunately, I'm going to be an empty nester in a few months. My kids are going off, moved away. So my wife and I will reinvigorate our relationship in a different way than we have in the past. So there's just a lot. And, I don't just work. I get to do fun things. And I think that's also really important as a medical professional here in Boston and elsewhere to maintain your interests because that's important, and keeping yourself healthy, emotionally healthy.
Yeah, have that balance. Well, that's great. Any final thoughts about Tufts before we move to we're going to take a stab at some listener questions?
Well, I think we've covered a lot.
Yeah,
I don't know if I have any other. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, do you have your questions there to go after here?
Let me see if I can find them.
All right.
I don't have them quite. Here they are. Do you want me to read the questions, or are you going to read them to me?
Yeah. So these are listener questions today. The topic we're talking about is physician shadowing, and so these are some of the questions that come in. And why don't you hit me with the first one?
In looking at the amount of shadowing I've done over the last few years, and I'm realizing that most of it has been done internationally, about 100 hours, I have 30 hours of shadowing 2 doctors in the United States. How do you think admissions committee will feel about this?
Well, this is a tough one
from David.
Yeah, this is a tough one.
So I think here's my feeling about shadowing in general. I like to think of shadowing as a little bit of a litmus test, an introduction to medicine. And so obviously there are all sorts of different types of shadowing, but I usually prefer applicants who apply to medical school to have clinical experiences that exceed shadowing. shadowing should be your first step, and you may have had that shadowing experience in high school. It may have been in college, may have been after college, but it is an impetus for you to say, I love this field. This is what I want to do for my life, or maybe not so much.
Mm-hmm.
And if you choose to really enjoy it, then you can go on to the next stage, which is to get your hands and feet wet a little bit by doing something with a little more substance, because
Mm-hmm.
shadowing tends to be fairly passive.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's certainly, it's an observational type experience as opposed to a hands-on doing experience. So in this particular case, the having experience internationally is nice, but the way medicine is practiced here in the United States is obviously important.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had students in the past gain international experience, seeing how physicians practice in other parts of the world, which might be very different from the way physicians are practicing here in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to make sure that you have an understanding of that in terms of many different aspects of patient care here, so that you know what you're getting into. So this particular person's experiences are totally fine for us.
Mm-hmm.
Having more international experience and local experience, that would not preclude that person from being accepted to our school. Again, it would, if this person were interviewed, we would ask more. I think it's from Kelsey.
Mm-hmm.
We would ask her more in-depth questions about what she learned about her experiences, what types of differences she noticed between the international and the local experiences, and then hopefully ask about what kind of experiences she's had in medicine above and beyond shadowing, to solidify her interest in going into medicine.
Yeah, I think I've heard this several times from applicants about the doing things internationally, and that some schools, they're worried that some schools might think that their numbers are kind of lopsided, that they have more work internationally than they do domestically. And so from what you're saying,
right.
I'd like to see what have they done on top of that from a more kind of patient care perspective, maybe in hands-on, work in some medically related field. Here's another one from Joseph at Southern Methodist University down there in Texas. I just finished my freshman year and I want to do some shadowing this summer. So this is all new to me. He says no one in his family has been involved in medicine. I just don't know where to begin on getting this stuff set up. Do I cold call hospitals for shadowing opportunities? Do I email a bunch of doctors? Do I send them my resume? He says, help. So we talked before.
Yeah, so that's a tough one. So
you've had people shadow you.
I want to start with.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what this is, unfortunately, is a reflection of two things. One, maybe three things. One is that shadowing is not easy to get anymore because of all sorts of patient privacy issues. It's harder and harder to get shadowing experience. It's harder to get in the door. Mm-hmm. The other thing that this pertains to is sort of the inequity of life, and that, my kids, my wife is a physician as well. They know lots of doctors. So if they want to go into medicine, they have a lot of doctors they can call and personal friends and colleagues and such. So it's very easy for them to get into the system. And then, of course, it pertains to having access to pre-med advice. And so for pre-health advising, this is something that a pre-health advisor at any particular university that has one could really help a student because of the locality. So, for example, in the particular area that the student might live or be spending in the summer, the school might have access to a list of physicians either that are linked to the university or alumni from the university that are typically very happy to help facilitate careers for current students, particularly current pre-med students. So I would not advise cold calling hospitals or emailing a bunch of doctors. I don't think that's a good way to get in the door for this particular situation. What I would do is start by maybe calling your own doctor, Joseph's own doctor, to see if that might be something that his physician might be able to help him with. and it also may be worthwhile calling the school, the pre-health office, if there is one, to see if there are a list of physicians who in his area that might be able to help them. That might be a good way to start.
One thing I was thinking about with regard to this question was, Joseph mentions no one in my family is in medicine, but gosh, maybe talk to mom and dad about, does any friends of yours, are they nurses or they work at a hospital that might help them tap into another type of network? At least get your foot in the door someplace. Wow, just because in your nucleus, nobody's in medicine, but boy, maybe there's somebody not too far away from your family that can help you at least kind of get you a name or something to help out and getting that foot in the door.
Right. And it should also be mentioned that by no means do you have to come from a family of doctors to get into medical school.
Yeah.
I think it's really important for people to understand that.
Mm-hmm. All right, here's the next one for you, Dr. Neumeyer, from Catherine at University at UCLA. And she says, I'm really interested in pediatric ENT, but I'm finding it's hard for me to get shadowing opportunities in this field. Is there a particular group of doctors that you think I should try to shadow instead? It's probably it's a very sort of focused question. Right. I think it's probably best to sort of say, if you have a very particular area of interest in a particular medical specialty, this time in someone's career, I think it's good to get as broad-based a area of interest, area of shadowing as possible. So it may be possible, for example, to go into a particular hospital network. If she's at UCLA, there are many good teaching hospitals in the area. Mm-hmm. And getting into a children's hospital, for example, and working with any doctor, and then working with that particular doctor will almost certainly know pediatric otolaryngologists to be able to get that student to shadow for a period of time. So if I had a student shadowing with me, for example, I could call up any doctor in the hospital and say, hey, I've got this great student. Would you be willing to take him or her under your wings for a couple of days so they can see and have a better understanding of your specialty? Mm-hmm. If she's striking out and getting into pediatric ENT, should she focus on, be just starting with primary care and kind of focusing there first, maybe, like you said, getting that broad exposure, at least starting, maybe family med, internal medicine, pediatrics, and then maybe that might open some doors, like you just said, so make a call for her.
Right. No, I think that's exactly right. And it also should be understood that you do not need to have a strong interest in any particular specialty before you go to medical school. We think, our job is to train you at medical school to be a really good general doctor, and that the specialty training actually comes later. But our selective program is perfectly geared for this type of experience and students' interest. So if you happen to be a Tufts, you could do a pediatric ENT selective and gain experience in that to see if it's the right field for you as a first-year medical student.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. Okay, last one. Here we go. Last one's coming from Hunter at Louisiana State University. He says, I'm planning on shadowing doctors and trying to volunteer at my local hospital this summer, which would be my first clinical experience. I want to do this not to just check off a box for my application, but to gain experience in the clinical world. How do I eventually make this sound genuine on an application so I don't look like I'm just checking off boxes?
Great question, Christian. And Hunter, to answer your question, I would say that this is exactly what you can do to explain it on your application, and you can explain about it in your essay. You can explain it in your experiences, and if you talk about your experiences in clinical work with passion, and you talk about it with a sense of knowledge and passion and experience in your interview, it will not sound like you're just checking off the box. So especially if you do it for a significant amount of time and you have, really interesting stories to tell about your experiences and how it's shaped your career and shaped your understanding of things, then you're not just checking off the box. Now, checking off the box might be your initial impetus to do it, and that's okay. We understand that. But it wasn't checking off the box that kept you doing it. And I think that's what's really important. It distinguishes the two.
I'm glad you said, David, about, the stories that you'll see and hear. And maybe I've advised students in the past, as you start to do these shadowing experiences, maybe keep some kind of journal. You go home after a day of shadowing and you remember these great stories or patients that you were able to sit in on the conversations with the physicians and the patient, then jot down the stuff that you saw and observed and the nonverbal and the verbal actions that took place. Because this might be helpful down the road when you're going to write about these experiences in that future application. Now you don't have to try to remember everything 2.5 years later that left an impression on you. And maybe going back, it is 2.5 years later, looking at that journal entry, you might think of things a little differently later on than you did when you were a freshman. Maybe a little naive.
That's a great idea.
Something like that. Well, Dr. Neumeyer, this has been a really fun time this afternoon, and I appreciate everything that you've given us and the time you've shared. Any final thoughts, any recommendations you have to our listeners, whether it's like a book or a podcast or a blog? Is there something that you would want to share as like kind of something that people should check out?
Well, let me just say it's been really a pleasure for me to talk with you too, Christian.
Thank you.
Your interview skills and style are just fantastic, and it's been a lot of fun. And is it okay if I give more than one example?
Let her rip, and I'll put this on the show site so people will put links to it on the show site. Yeah.
So I tried to find think about my two favorite books.
Yeah.
And I can't say that I'm a literary sophisticate. The books I read are not necessarily the type of things that you might see English majors or philosophers. The books that I've enjoyed over the years have been things that are really personal and touching. So my two favorite books that I've read over the years, the first is A Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving.
Okay.
And the reason why that book sticks is, besides loving that book so much and loving the writing style that John Irving has, it's a local story. It's a story about faith and friendship, humanism and kindness. But it's also the story that really me and my wife became interested in each other about this book. And so we happened to be reading it at the same time and got to know each other. And so this was sort of the book that started our relationship.
Oh, wow.
And so that's kind of a meaningful thing. And so we sort of still talk about the book and reflect upon that's how we met really over this book.
Oh, wow.
The second book that I've really enjoyed it, which I read a little more recently, a few years ago, was called The Art of Racing in the Rain by Garth Stein. And what I found interesting in this book was the perspective of how the book was written. It's written about a troubled race car driver who's going through a divorce and has just a challenging life situation. But the book is written from the perspective of his pet dog named Enzo.
Oh, I think
so it's just a wonderful story, a sort of heartwarming story, and a really interesting perspective. And it attests to the dog's ability to sort of detect disease and understand human life. So I really enjoyed that book.
Oh, that's great.
And then the third thing I would say is I'm also involved in listening to podcasts now. It's sort of a new thing for me, commuting to work. And I started listening to a podcast called Hardcore History by Dan Carlin.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know if you've heard about Hardcore History, but I'm about halfway through the second one about World War I. Each one is somewhere between 3 and 4 hours long.
Yeah, they're long.
And it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Long and fascinating. And he is just wonderful. So I just find that to be completely different. It gets my mind to learn about new things and things that I didn't fully understand in the past. And understanding history is so important for understanding society and what happens in the future. So,
well, these are great. I will put links to these on our site so that listeners, if they want to go and pick these up or read a little more about them, that they can go find them there. Dr. Neumeyer, this has been really, again, a great pleasure to have you on today. I think we've covered a lot of ground and a lot of really helpful advice. So I want to thank you again.
You're very welcome, Christian, and it's my pleasure.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Okay, there you go. One more episode that I hope you got a lot of great information from and found helpful. Listen, we got a few people coming down the road in the next few weeks for more episodes. Next up will probably be Dell Medical School in Texas. So everybody down in Texas, get ready to hear about the Dell Medical School. It's a rather new school. And also we're going to be talking about explaining how TMD-SAS works. And so that's a separate application process for those applying to schools in Texas. So we're going to dive into kind of how that works. I know for some people that's kind of a black box. So, hey, you can find us on Apple iTunes. You can find us on Spotify and Stitcher. Be sure to check out the show page where we put resources that come up during the conversation with my guests. I put it on the show page. You can visit that at case.edu/medicine/all-access. As always, keep those questions coming in. I read them. I respond to them. You can send those to allaccess@case.edu. So until next time, thanks everybody.